Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly one of the most unbelievable real-life spy thrillers of the 20th century. We are talking about a clandestine operation so massive and so perfectly hidden that it secretly shaped global politics and international conflicts for over 50 years. It's a story of high-stakes cryptography, absolute betrayal, and a brilliant trap set on a global scale. To really wrap our heads around how this operation worked, we have to rewind to a highly publicized moment in history. Picture this. It's 1979, and a massive international crisis is dominating the news. Radical supporters of the Islamic Revolution have just stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 U.S. citizens captive. For 444 agonizing days, these individuals were held hostage. Naturally, U.S. President Jimmy Carter was desperately trying to negotiate with the Iranian militants to get them home safely. But since the two nations weren't exactly on speaking terms, all of these incredibly sensitive negotiations had to run through Algeria, which stepped in as a neutral mediator. And this right here perfectly sets up the central mystery of our explainer today. You see, the communication between Algeria and Iran was heavily encrypted. The Iranians were completely convinced that nobody could read or listen in to their internal discussions. And yet, after every single exchange, President Carter and top U.S. officials knew exactly what the Iranians were saying behind closed doors. So how is it possible that the U.S. had total, unrestricted access to these supposedly unbreakable messages? Well, the answer actually leads us straight to a supposedly neutral Swiss company called Crypto AG. Now, this incredible deception, Operation Rubicon, which was originally codenamed the Saurus, didn't just happen overnight. It actually kicked off decades earlier, in 1951, with a quiet little dinner at the exclusive Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C. Just a handshake between a U.S. military cryptologist named William Friedman and a Swedish inventor named Boris Halen. From there, it escalated into a massive covert buyout in 1970, and incredibly, it remained a closely guarded secret all the way until a massive leak in 2020 to journalists like Greg Miller at The Washington Post. Part 1. The perfect espionage track. To understand exactly how they built this trap, we need to talk about that Swedish inventor I just mentioned, Boris Halen. Halen was a brilliant guy who developed these small mechanical cipher devices. During World War II, his biggest customer was actually the U.S. military. They bought over 140,000 units of his compact lunchbox-sized cipher machine, which basically made him an absolute millionaire overnight. But after the war, business naturally slowed down. Halen eventually moved his company to Switzerland, founded Crypto AG, and released a brand new, highly complex machine called the CX52. Here's how it worked. You'd start with a plain text input. Both the sender and receiver needed the same daily key, which was the machine's default setting, and a message key. You enter a letter, pull a crank, and a series of key wheels inside a revolving drum starts to move. Because mechanical systems can't produce truly random results, they follow fixed algorithms. So the machine assigns a new, seemingly random letter to your input, which then gets sent out as encrypted Morse code. At the time, people thought this new CX52 machine was literally uncrackable. But U.S. intelligence? Yeah, they were terrified. If Halen sold these brilliant machines all over the world, the U.S. would go completely blind and deaf to global communications. So the CIA stepped in and struck a deal. They offered to help market Crypto AG devices globally, but with a massive catch. Halen had to produce two different versions of the machine. One was a highly secure variant, strictly reserved for U.S. allies. The other? It was secretly rigged. Decades later, a Dutch IT expert named Bart Wessel figured out exactly how they pulled it off. In the rigged C52 variants, 30 of the 32 sliding bars on the revolving drum were secretly blocked by little metal discs. They were basically dead. This meant they produced far simpler, way more predictable patterns that the CIA could crack with ease, all while the user was sitting there thinking their communications were totally secure. Now, Halen didn't just hand over this massive advantage out of the goodness of his heart. For agreeing to restrict his top-tier machines to selected countries and push the rigged ones onto everybody else, he was paid incredibly well. He reportedly got nearly $900,000 from the CIA up front, which, just to put that in perspective, is roughly $10 million in today's money. On top of that, he scored a $70,000 annual retainer. Halen went from being a passive wartime ally to an active, highly paid asset on the U.S. intelligence payroll. Part 2. The corporate takeover and global spying. Fast forward to the late 1960s, and Boris Halen is nearing 80 years old and looking to retire. The intelligence agencies quickly realize they can't just rely on a gentleman's agreement forever. They need total corporate control of Crypto AG. So in June of 1970, the CIA teams up with Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, the BND. Together, they quietly purchased the entire company for 25 million Swiss francs, which was about $5.75 million back then. To hide the fact that two major world governments were buying a private company, they routed the cash through anonymous shell companies in Liechtenstein. But there was a snag. Hagelin had a son, Bo Hagelin Jr., who handled the company's sales in the Americas. Bo actually knew about the rigging, and he absolutely hated it. The CIA viewed him as a major liability. Tragically, just months after the buyout, Bo died in a car crash near Washington, D.C. The timing and the circumstances were so incredibly suspicious that even the vice president of the DND later questioned if it was truly an accident, though, to be fair, no concrete evidence of foul play has ever surfaced. So, with Hagelin Sr. retired and his son out of the picture, the agencies had full control, and business just exploded. Look at this. In just the first 5 years after the covert buyout, sales surged from 15 million Swiss francs to a staggering 51 million. More than 120 governments around the world were buying these devices, completely trusting this supposedly neutral Swiss company with their absolute top-secret state communications. I think investigative journalist Greg Miller, who helped break this story, really summed it up perfectly. He said, "To me, the most surprising thing here was the enormity of this, tricking dozens, over 100 other governments. It's not just that a covert operation worked, it's the sheer jaw-dropping scale of it and the sheer audacity it took to keep this deception running for decades." Part 3. Historical fallout. We have to remember this wasn't just some academic exercise in data collection. Operation Rubicon had very real, very deadly consequences on the ground. When you can intercept and decode the secret messages of over 100 nations, you literally hold the power to tip the scales of major historical conflicts. Take 1982, for instance, when Argentina attempted to seize the Falkland Islands from Britain. The Argentinians had absolutely no clue that their crypto machines were rigged, so the BND and the CIA simply intercepted their radio comms, decrypted them, and quietly handed that vital intelligence straight to the British. This played a huge role in decisive moments of the war, like the British submarine attack that sank the Argentine cruiser Belgrano, an event that resulted in the deaths of over 300 Argentinian soldiers. A few years later, in 1986, a bomb went off at the La Belle nightclub in West Berlin, tragically killing 3 people and wounding over 100 more. Within a matter of days, U.S. President Ronald Reagan publicly pointed the finger directly at Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi. How could the U.S. be so certain, so incredibly fast? Because Libya was relying on those weaker, rigged crypto machines. The CIA and BND were literally reading the Libyan embassy's internal communications detailing the attack. Just 10 days later, using that exact intercepted intelligence, the U.S. launched retaliatory airstrikes on targets in Libya. But this brings us to a really profound, chilling intelligence dilemma. In 1978, Argentina was under the thumb of a brutal military dictatorship. By intercepting crypto communications, the CIA and BND uncovered horrific details of state-sponsored atrocities. They were actively listening as the dictatorship abducted, tortured, and murdered dissidents, even flying them out over the Atlantic and dropping them to their deaths. From centers like Campo de la Ribera alone, an estimated 30,000 victims were killed. Yet, the intelligence agencies did absolutely nothing with this information. They just watched. Why? Because stepping in to stop it would have immediately tipped off the world that they were cracking the codes. It would have burned their most vital intelligence source right in the middle of the Cold War. It is a really stark, uncomfortable look at the moral cost of espionage. Part 4. The secret unravels. Now, maintaining an airtight secret of this magnitude across multiple decades and continents is, frankly, nearly impossible. Eventually, the human element becomes the weakest link. By the late 70s and early 90s, the whole thing slowly started to unravel from the inside out. The dominoes began falling with crypto's deputy director, Peter Frutiger. Back in 1977, he went out to personally install upgraded security for the Shah of Iran. During the visit, the Shah actually boasted to him that crypto devices were the only ones on the market he could truly trust, completely unaware he was using rigged equipment. The guilt of looking this high-profile client in the eye and shrinking him was too much for Frutiger. He resigned and eventually became a whistleblower. Then the real explosion happened in 1992. A top crypto salesman named Hans Buhler, who genuinely knew nothing about the rigging, was on a business trip in Iran. The Iranians, who were getting highly suspicious by this point, arrested him, threw him into a military prison, and interrogated him for 9 traumatizing months. Once he was finally released, a very suspicious Buhler went straight to the global press. The fallout was instant. Nations like Argentina, Italy, and Egypt started canceling their contracts left and right. This entire crisis completely shattered the alliance between the two intelligence agencies. To get Bueller out of that Iranian prison, the German BND had secretly paid a $1 million ransom. The CIA outright refused to chip in a single dime, citing their strict policy against paying ransoms. The Germans, who were already getting really uncomfortable with the moral implications of the whole operation, decided they'd had enough and officially withdrew in 1993. So what did the CIA do? They just bought out the BND's shares for $17 million and boldly kept running Crypto AG all by themselves for another 25 years, right up until 2018. Part 5. The modern threat. It's really easy to look at Operation Rubicon and think of it as just a crazy, fascinating piece of Cold War history. But the actual mechanisms of this operation, government intelligence agencies secretly co-opting private tech companies, are hugely relevant to our lives today. When the CIA's internal history of this operation, a document known as the Minerva Report, was finally leaked, it dropped some explosive details about private sector involvement. It revealed that the massive German conglomerate Siemens, operating under the codename Olympia, secretly advised crypto on business and technical issues and took a 5% cut of their sales in return. The U.S. tech giant Motorola, codenamed Navajo, was also brought in to provide technical assistance directly for the CIA. It really goes to show that the line between private technology firms and government intelligence has been blurry for a very, very long time. And honestly, we probably still don't know the full scale of what was actually intercepted. According to a report by the German broadcaster ZDF, there are some pretty explosive allegations out there that the BND kept intercepting certain communications even after they formally withdrew from the partnership. The report claims they intercepted messages that hinted at the hijackers before the September 11 attacks, but that crucial information was allegedly not passed on to the U.S. in time. It makes you realize we're likely only seeing fragments of this operation's true scale. Which leaves us with this final, vital thought to chew on. Today, obviously, we aren't using clunky mechanical cipher machines. Our personal data, every message we send, every search we make, everything we do online passes through modern tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and Verizon. And we know for a fact that these companies face intense government pressure to hand over data in the name of national security. Operation Rubicon proves without a doubt that governments are willing to go to unimaginable lengths for decades at a time to secretly access private communications. So we really have to ask ourselves, if governments could secretly own the world's top encryption company for half a century, who actually holds the keys to your data today? Is our personal privacy just a total illusion? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.